Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. I am Zach Adams, and today we are going to be talking about what makes a good pantser, or how to be a better pantser if you already are one. So stick around. If this is your first time stopping by the channel, we talk about a lot of writing things here, a lot of books here, and there is a podcast in here talking about writing and coding and sort of exploring the creative process through both of those lenses. If you like what you see, I would really appreciate if you could give it a subscribe. That lets the algorithm know that people like you would like to see this as well. So the age-old conundrum, pantser or plotter, gardener or architect, which are you? Hopefully, if you are here, you are either a pantser or you are trying to become a pantser because plotting has not been working out for you. I've been there. That's me. Hello. One of the first things to clear up about pantsing, if you are new to writing, pantsing does not mean that you have no idea what's going to happen. You just sit down and you just start writing. You may have a very limited amount of notes. You may have some extensive notes, but they're not in any kind of outline format. You may have a few ideas for scenes. You have something to go on. You have an idea for a story, but instead of sucking all the creative juice, all the creative life out of your project by going through an intensive planning and outlining process before you sit down to start writing, you are the kind of person who would rather sit down and develop the story as you write it. We're going to be talking about how to turn up and maximize those benefits while we maybe turn down the costs or say smooth out the edges today. The first thing to sort of touch on, and this may just be a thing that all writers sort of need to have an idea of, is that we as people are interested in people. So knowing your characters and knowing a general basis for human behavior is a huge boon to a pantser. So that when you sit down, you can say they're terrified. This is what people who are terrified like to do in these sorts of things. They don't think rationally. So it's okay for the blonde girl to run into the scary house because she's not really thinking about it. From that point, you want to sort of let your characters dictate where the story goes. You want to sort of follow along and develop and really let the characters drive the fiction. One of the main things that happens with a lot of pantsers you'll see, or a lot of pantsers that you can see interviews where they talk about their process, is they may find the characters on the page. They may start out and they have an idea for who someone is going to be, but you can tell even in reading the book that they really have developed that character through the first 3, 4, 5, even, quarter of the book. And that character starts to really come to life. These sorts of things can be helped when you have a smaller cast. It's just less characters to figure out, right? Like you can let characters really sort of develop and drive the story on their own. If there are less of them, they take up less time in your book. This isn't true of all pantsers. Of course, you don't have to have a small cast to be a pantser. There are very notable exceptions. George R. R. Martin comes to mind immediately, where he has a very expansive cast. But even with George's work, as you've gone through A Song of Ice and Fire, you've seen that there are 7 perspectives in the first book, and then it expands a little bit, and there are a few more in the second. And even he is sort of figuring it out as he goes and adding things as he comes up with new ideas and becomes more familiar with those people. Then he can start to juggle a few more of them. This leads me to my second point, and that is to not be afraid to get in over your head and figure it out as you go, or even not figure it out. Sometimes you will go through and you'll be writing a section and you'll have a subplot that you just don't know how to finish for now, or you don't know how to develop for now. And you may not know how to bridge a certain gap with a character where they're in this, space and they need to get over here to their friends, but you don't know what would motivate them to get over there for now. And so he just shows up, and that's okay in a first draft. That's okay in a second draft. Even as you're going through this, you got to figure it out on the page oftentimes as a pantser, and that might take a few drafts. The third point of this is that as long as you in those early drafts are really leaning into tension, you can really trust that process. it's okay that you don't have all those answers, right? Like as long as you're going from, oh, this is interesting, these characters are making cool decisions, they're in odd situations, and you're developing those things around them, then it's okay that it doesn't always make 100% sense. It's okay to have a few plot holes or to have a few sort of, it's okay to have a few Emperor's New Groove moments where, you know, it really doesn't make sense, you know, right? Like that moment. One of the things that can sort of help this is to try the improv technique. If you feel yourself starting to get stuck, yes, and. So whatever the character wants to do, I don't know how to make that work. Yes, and I'm going with it. And here's the thing I'm going to add. And maybe that thing doesn't make sense right now, but maybe what you need as a pantser is to write that thing so that you can figure out what the truly good thing is. Because you see the mistakes. I wrote in space penguins that come in to save my character as they're falling from this pit, you know, like, and the space penguins pick in, and it doesn't make any sense in my story because it's basically Indiana Jones. Now there's space penguins in it, but the space penguins pick him up and they you know, drop him 3 miles down the river. I can figure out how Indy style, you know, survives that fall later. I need him to get down the river for now so I can keep writing. And so you have that very tense moment, and then you have him show up later and it's like, okay, well, Indy survived, that's fine. And you can keep developing the story. That's what's important in a first draft, especially as a pantser. It's to not get stuck up on those things. If you're going to worry about having every single detail as you go, it's probably better to just plot it. Our fourth tip is a really quick one that actually comes from probably the most famous pantser of them all, Stephen King, who gives the advice that as you are writing, don't stop when you finish a scene. Don't stop after some kind of conflict has been resolved. Always stop writing for the day when you know what's coming next. Stop at the just before the exciting part, just before the action kicks in or the twist happens. The reason for this is because as a pantser, you can't like just pull up your script and be like, oh, what's next? Ah, perfect. I know exactly. And just keep going. If you stop and don't have an idea of what's coming next, if you stop right after the big action has happened and everything's calmed down and you don't know where it's going to go next, that's like approaching the blank page where you're starting from scratch every single time you sit down. And that can be such a drag, such a slog. And it's so daunting when you don't have anything to go off of. You don't know where you're going next. So Stephen King's recommendation, and I will second this, which means nothing compared to his recommendation, that you should always stop when you know what's going to happen next. Remember that revision is your friend. Being a pantser does not mean getting it right the first time. If you are a pantser or a gardener, it is okay to explore the story on the page. It is okay to have extra sections when you are done. It is okay that you have to rewrite or that you have to swap a whole character because their personality just doesn't jive with the theme of your story, or any sort of kind of thing you might have to edit or revise is perfectly fine. That is okay. That is okay for all kinds of writing. As long as you are getting the story on the page, you can always change it later. As was said on Downton Abbey, we all have chapters we would rather keep unpublished. That is definitely true for pantsers. As you work through a story, you're going to find, oh, I'm off on a tangent over here. And you work the story back and you find a way to cut that out at a later thing. That is okay. And that portion is fine. Okay, I'm a notoriously slow starter. I will not just have a slow start. I will have 4 or 5 false starts when I start a story, especially long ones. And that initial 4 or 5 false starts aren't bad. They're actually great. I've recognized I need them for me to figure out what I'm talking about at the start of the story, to give myself a chance to get into the headspace of the character, to get into my POV. I know that comparison with other writers is 1, unfair, and 2, wildly inaccurate most of the time, but it is true to remember that as a pantser, you've actually saved yourself a lot of time compared to if you were a plotter. You would have a month or 2 months of going through and figuring out, which is okay to spend that time in revision then. You can tighten up your themes there. You can, work on symbolism. You can add in foreshadowing of different elements that you originally didn't know were coming. These kinds of things are very common for pantsers. If you are writing along and you're like, man, I'm not doing any of this, don't feel discouraged. That is sometimes the case, that you are so following in the story that you haven't had a chance to look forward, look back, look forward, look back, which is great for the writing process. It means you're getting a lot of words down on the page, and that is the point. Revision is revision. It will happen later, and it needs to happen. And it is okay that it is sometimes an extensive process with big changes, especially for a pantser. If you are a pantser or you are getting into trying pantsing, I hope that this has helped you maybe assuage some fears that you've had about how your first draft is going, or how your writing doesn't seem to be the same kind of writing as your friend who does a lot of plotting and they are able to do these sorts of things. That is okay. You may just need to do a little more revision on the back end. You may need to explore your characters a little more on the page and let that be something that you just pull out later. These are things that are okay. I hope that this has helped, that you have found new tools or new ideas to use when approaching your pantsing style. It's also okay to take some notes, to have some source material off to the side. You don't have to just sit down with nothing ready to go and just write a whole book out from literally your head to the page. It is okay to have notes. It is okay to even put in bullet points. I'd like this and this and this. Here are major sections. That is okay. Remember that pantsing and plotting are a spectrum, where on the far side you have the sit down and write from nothing, and pantser runs all the way until you get to more or so plotting before you write and figuring things out. And plotting goes all the way to knowing every single scene with, snippets of dialogue included. And the book is basically written and you just have to basically cut and paste it together. It is okay to be anywhere on that spectrum. And if you are a pantser and you have some notes, that's fine. You can still call yourself a pantser. Well, I do hope that this has been helpful for you and that I have not rambled too much. I have been Zach Adams. Again, if you like this, if you found this useful, if you want to see more, hit subscribe. We put out 3 videos a week. We talk about books, doing sort of book review things. We talk about writing guides, as this is. We talk about a vlog where I'm talking about the latest projects that I'm working on and the issues that I have rising and falling in that. And there, again, is the podcast. If you are interested in any of that, hit subscribe. I do appreciate you stopping by. Thanks, traveler.